Hi, everyone. Sonia Osorio, Executive Director of Now NYC. Sorry for the delay, but glad you are on. We know you don't have a lot of time in your lunch hour. We are so thrilled to have with us today Eric Adams, running for mayor of New York City. We are going to get right to it. Please leave your questions in our chat. On our website, we have his and all the other candidates' questionnaires, an exhaustive questionnaire, I know, 23 odd questions. So you can also check that out as well. So if you don't know Mr. Adams, he is a longtime government official, public servant here in New York City, was a New York City police officer for many years. He then was a senator in the New York State legislature, passing laws, and most recently, Brooklyn Borough president. So welcome, Mr. Adams.
Thank you so much. And it's really great seeing you again and speaking on Now's platform.
I wanted to start with a few just questions so that people could get to know you a little bit beyond your policies and your experience. What is the most common misperception you believe voters have about you? And what is it you want them to know about you instead?
I am not a politician. I am a public servant for over 35 years, and raised by a single mom. I saw how the barriers that were put in place prevented her or made it difficult for her to raise these 6 children that she was responsible for as a single mom. And I think that when people understand the holistic approach to governing, it's about ending those inequalities and those barriers. And lastly, I cry every time I see 3 Heartbeats, 5 Heartbeats, my favorite movie.
That is a good one. What's one thing you change about life in New York City? And meaning life for you?
For me personally? That was the question for me personally?
Yes, yes.
Probably my health journey. People talked about it, and I wrote a book on it. Being diabetic, losing my sight, told that I would be blind in a year, having nerve damage in my hands and feet, and high blood pressure, and all of the characteristics of a lifestyle change I needed to make. And instead of going on medication, I embraced a lifestyle change through diet, and I was able to reverse my vision loss, my nerve damage, and my diabetes. And now I have a program at Bellevue Hospital, the first of its kind in America, where people are actually reversing chronic diseases or getting off their medicine. And this is something I want to do as mayor in every health and hospital system in the city.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. When did you first realize you were a feminist?
Watching my mom, people think that empowering women will empower just women. That is just not true. Mom had 4 boys, and I am who I am because of the women in my life. They have shown me the power of women, and when you remove those barriers that prevent women from moving forward, you are actually going to empower entire families. And even boys like me will grow up to do good things because of the foundation that women have placed into my life. And even here, as Tish James, the former council person, now AG, she did a report showing how you ensure pay equity. And I led the city. I was the only city agency that paid women 13% higher than men in my agency, the borough president's office. And that is how I want to continue, not only talking about being a person that empowers women, but also putting in place real policies that would carry out the actions.
Well, thank you. That's music to our ears. What do you do to stay sane during this race? We were talking about that for a minute before we went live. I mean, this is a test of will and stamina and mental strength.
It really is. I laugh sometimes because it's a combination. Like, I'm dressed casual now because I just finished my afternoon meditation period. I believe breathing and meditation really centers you. Sometimes we talk about the physical health and what we eat. We forget the mental health. I like to say the anatomy of our spirit. We need to nourish it with ways of just bringing a level of calmness. And believe it or not, one of my favorite parts of campaigning is being at a train station or at a street fair somewhere and engaging with people and laughing a little and just seeing how people love the city and they are embracing the diversity of this city. But meditation and breathing exercises, they really center me in a real way.
Thank you so, so much. I'd love to give you a few minutes to just start by talking about what you would do to put women front and center. How would you want to change the landscape for women in the first 4 years of an Adams administration?
It's looking at the direct and indirect ways that we have placed barriers in front of women. First, pay, equal pay, pay equity. And as I mentioned, I'm doing that already. So before people talk about what they're going to do, we should look at what they have done already. Second, public safety. We ignore the fact that public safety really impacts on the lives of women. We must have a safe city. When you see a 3-year-old shot in Times Square or 1-year-old murdered in Bedford-Stuyvesant, this impacts on the public safety of families and women in the city. So I'm going to ensure that this city is a safe city. Third, something that's important to me is to upper management of government. You will see women in the upper echelons of government in my administration where they're going to make decisions on how to improve the entire city and a real pathway to moving women from from being chief of staff to commissioners and those important roles that are in the city that we often ignored. And we need to do it in real time, give real orders to all of our agencies and ensure that they live up to the real commitment that we have as New Yorkers. And I have done that as borough president, and I'm going to continue to do that as the mayor of the city of New York.
Well, thank you so much. We polled our members, and two of the issues that you've just brought up were front and center for them, which was education, educating their kids, safety here in the city, and also housing.
Yes.
So on education, it's something that has befuddled every mayor that has come before you. How would you be able to fix our schools when you think about how little others have been able to? I mean, how are you going to get that done?
And that's a great question. And there's a quote that I live by, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. We spend a lifetime pulling people out of the river. No one goes upstream and prevent them from falling in the first place. Nothing personifies that more than education. We have education wrong. I met with leading neurologists and pediatricians, and they clearly stated that Eric is the first 1,000 days of life, that those days are crucial and important to children. Eric Adams is mayor. We're going to make sure that every mother upon pregnancy will have a doula that needs one, particularly in economically challenging areas. And then we're going to bring back the joy of learning in school again and lean into what's called an asset-based education. Our diversity and differences is really an opportunity for education and instructions. That's why we're seeing so much hate crime and increase in hate crime in the city, is because we don't know each other and we're not educating our children based on that. And then we have to bring back the joy of learning. Our teachers are so tied up with high-stake testing. Instead of really exploring the joy of learning in our schools, everything from internships, externships, using the problems in our city, having children come up with solutions of civic engagement, lean into vocational training in the process as well, put every child on a pathway of employment or an occupation. And finally, allowing our corporate entities to be part of creating the curricula for our educational system. We're in a bubble right now. The purpose of education so that our children can be employed, start their own companies, or be gainfully part of the economics of the city. And we're not doing that, and we're going to turn that around.
Well, thank you so much. One of the things when I think about education, well, lots of issues. You know, they become such political hot buttons. I mean, they're contentious. You know, just in reading about the history in New York City, efforts to desegregate. I mean, wow. I mean, some of the biggest marches ever happened were over that. And some of them for desegregation, others against it, opposing it. You know, how, as I mean, you've been in government for a long time. How do you deal with political pushback, or when you have such fervent different um, groups? To me, that is a key. That's what stops so many people from getting ahead or getting movement on stuff. What have you learned in your time to disarm that, to bring people together?
That is an excellent question. It's amazing. Human beings, out of all other animals, we have the ability to reason and to communicate. And we bring with us a lot of the deep pains and scars from future encounters. And that is at the heart of a lot of the arguments and disputes that we have. We view the resources of the city from a deficit and not an asset. uh, we have more than enough in this city through taxpayers doing their job of paying their taxes to ensure that every New Yorker can have an opportunity to prosper and grow. I put in place an initiative 2 years ago called Breaking Bread, Building Bonds, 100 dinners across the city, 10 individuals at each dinner, all coming from a different ethnic group and a different background. And we did something revolutionary. We talked to each other. We use this lubricating value of food to learn about who we are and what's important to each other. And that's the same thing we must do. We must be intentional about encouraging our children to communicate and learn from each other. And then we need to bring together local groups to talk about what do we want our school systems to look like? How do we deal with these tough questions like the SHSAT, gifted and talented programs? So, all these different challenging conversations that we're doing a top-down approach instead of what we did in District 15 in Park Slope, where the parents and children came together and talked about how you diversify your schools, how do we share the assets of our communities to really change the narrative that we have to be separate from each other. And that is what we must do, is take longer, it's more work, there's more investment, but this is the only way we're going to stop this tension that we are seeing in our city.
Well, thank you so much. Those are the breaking the bread is a concept that our board president, Abby Dobson, always talks about. So next, housing. There's so many different areas to talk about. I think the one that's most immediate in my mind is the moratorium on evictions. Right? They've been pushed back several times, most recently now until August. That's being challenged in the courts. But this is a huge issue. Whenever it ends, there's going to be the rent that's accrued. This is going to be there could be a storm of evictions, bankruptcies, and foreclosures. That domino effect. It could be a disaster, and then more families could be displaced, more homelessness. What? How will you negotiate, mitigate, and handle this housing disaster, potential housing disaster?
And that's a great question. There must be a balance put in place to deal with the housing crisis that's looming over us. And just as we should make tenants whole, I believe that we have dollars that are allocated on the federal level, part of the stimulus package, and on the state level to help make tenants whole. But making tenants whole should also come with making landlords whole. The dollars that we are excusing rent for people with real hardships, those dollars should go to landlords directly, because the worst thing could happen is for landlords to fall behind in their utility bills, fall behind in their mortgage payments, and we leave them holding the bag of COVID-19. That can't happen. And as the mayor, I'm going to ensure that does not happen. And we already have plans in place on the state level, on the federal level. We need to make sure those dollars go to those landlords and tenants that are in need. And by doing this, we won't aggravate the homeless crisis, because if we get it wrong, we will have a large number of tenants that would fall into our shelter system, and it's just not sustainable. So one of the best investments we can make is to make sure landlords and tenants are made whole as we get through this crisis that we are facing.
Mhm. I mean, as it is, we already spend 2 billion a year
Yes.
on homelessness. So in the housing area, 2 points in terms of the homelessness. This goes back to the question we just talked about of just contentious situations. What did you learn from the situation with the Luzerne on the Upper West Side? You know, the hotel that was converted, at least short term, for homeless New Yorkers, and just everything that happened there with the community being up in arms on both sides of that.
It's a picture perfect example of how not to build out a homeless policy, and how one would disrupt an entire community. That hotel was not a place that could hold a housing crisis, or individuals who were seeking some form of shelter. After the COVID hit the city, it was smart to separate the congregate locations where you had large number of people in one space, because that will only aggravate the spreading of the COVID virus. But you can't just drop a large number of homeless people into a community without any form of activities, any form of job placement, any form of counseling, wraparound services, so they can just loiter, be outside, become disruptive to that entire community, and almost destabilize a community. We saw that also in the downtown Brooklyn area, and we saw the destabilization of this program that was put in place. So any facility that we utilize should be right to house homeless men and women, and it should have a location where people can congregate without loitering out front, being disruptive to the quality of life of a community, and put them on a pathway to employment, education, or supportive services in the area of dealing with mental health. That was not done in the Luzerne Hotel example, and it has not been done in too many examples. We must move away from sheltering people to housing people into permanent housing.
And so one of your ideas is buying up vacant apartments, office space to do that, correct?
Yes, yes. Three ideas we believe are important to utilize. Number one, retrofitting hotels, out of borough hotels. They can be turned into kitchenette. It's easy to tear down the wall to turn them into one-bedroom apartments. It's cheaper to retrofit and renovate these hotels into housing than it is to build from ground up. And this is a great opportunity to do so. Many hotels are going out of service. The government can come in, purchase those hotels, and turn them into kitchenette type apartments. Second, we need to change our SRO laws. There's some excellent examples of micro units, SROs, that are easier to build and manufacture. They're cheaper, and this would really help the single adult population that we are witnessing, and not go into the hotel type system. And third, we must look at preventing people from being homeless in the first place. The current voucher program is not meeting the cost of an apartment in the city. We need to turn that around, increase the FEPS vouchers and other vouchers to make sure that they actually meet the cost of renting an apartment in the city.
Thank you. You know, and just thirdly, what in terms of, I don't even know how to describe, I don't know what affordable housing is. It seems to be different for everybody. But when I think about housing as the American dream, and it being out of reach for so many New Yorkers, and the implications for my kids, and for the future economy. You know, companies that want to be able to attract people here, you want to be able to see that there is an American dream here in terms of home ownership. What do you say to young people who just, it seems so out of the reach?
Yes, and it is frightening to them. I have a 24-year-old, and we talk about it all the time. He states that I want to stay in the city, but it's just so unaffordable for me to do so. And this is a real crisis. And we need to start reshaping how we live in this city. And that's why I talk about changing some of our office buildings to different living arrangements and apartment layouts. I have witnessed how European cities are reshaping the thought of apartments, doing a sharing of joint living spaces where people have their independent space where they live on their own, but sharing libraries, sharing gyms, sharing even dining rooms. For we don't use these formal arrangements all the time. And our young people are really into the shared living style. You know, you and I may not be, but they're used to the sharing of the spaces. And we should start reshaping apartments, dwellings to reflect how young people are willing to live. It's cheaper to do so. And it also encourages, believe it or not, a greater level of exchange of energies, information, and ideas. And so, really, we need to look at a new living model in the city, like other European cities are starting to do, that we could bring down the cost. I'm a big believer in micro units, a smaller apartment size. We should look at our zoning laws to really bring them up to date with how people are living now.
Super interesting. So let's talk a little bit about safety before you have to go. We have had a surge in gun violence, robberies, street assaults. You mentioned the terrible incident in Times Square just recently. You know, last summer there was one day that there were 15 shootings. One day. Are you nervous about this summer? What advice do you have for Mayor de Blasio to prevent another crime wave?
Yes, I am. I am extremely nervous. Last July, I was talking about the increasing gun violence and gang violence. The gangs in this city, they are causing the increase in much of the violence that we're witnessing around predatory crimes, particularly the murders, the homicides, the shootings. The numbers are on the increase, and it is really alarming. So there's several things I believe we need to do. One, we must make sure that we reinstitute some form of anti-crime unit or plainclothes unit, I should say, a plainclothes unit that is now defined as a gun unit. Their focus should be precision policing, going after the known gangs, going after the known shooters in the city, and really to get people out of gangs. And those who are refusing to do so, there must be real enforcement, because we can't have this level of gangs violence in our city. Second, we need to do what we did around terrorism. We combined the state, the city, the federal government into what was called the Joint Terrorist Task Force, and we zeroed in on those terrorists, those men and women who wanted to harm our city through terrorism. We need to do the same with gangs and guns. There should be a joint approach to stop the flow of guns in this city, and also really clamp down on those places where guns are being sold illegally in the city. And we should have a special prosecutor on gangs and gun violence so that we can connect the various entities across the city who are they're basically carrying out this level of violence that we're seeing in the city. But we must become serious about this. If not, you're going to see a real spike and a real violent summer, something that I believe we cannot allow to happen in this city.
I guess that would mean that you are in favor of keeping the narcotics special prosecutor's office.
Yes, I am. I believe that the Narcotics Special Prosecutor's Office, as well as a new office using what was called the Gun Suppression Unit and our gang unit, combining all entities with a gun and gang special prosecutor, we can start connecting the dots, because people who use violence don't stay in one borough. But right now, our approach is a one borough focus. We need to have a combined focus to identify those who are causing the violence in our city.
I would say the same thing about crimes against women. That could be a good idea. You could have a cross-jurisdictional unit focusing on crimes against women.
Yes,
The pandemic put that into really clear perspective.
yes, it
Domestic
did.
violence calls were up 30%. There were 45 women who died by the fall of last year. One of them was pregnant within, I think, 1 week. I mean, I kept opening the daily news and seeing this, and we've become numb to it. There were nearly 1,500 reported rapes last year when most people were home. It affects crimes against women affect our community in so many ways. People's ability to continue working, their mental health, the economy, the resources on our healthcare system. There was something that you said in your questionnaire about reducing sexual assault, which was very philosophical about teaching kids from an early age about gender equality and such. But I like this idea now about a bureau, and one of the things that I wanted to tell you about is one of the things that we have worked with the police commissioner Shea, and before him with O'Neill, struggling along to make changes in the special victims division as one point of contact for victims. And we've been doing surveys. We've just finished our second consecutive one. And just to let you know, of the 20 organizations, the 20 major rape crisis programs and advocacy organizations, all of them, 19, the quality of SVD investigations vary widely. So there's really an opportunity to do a better job. And everybody, all victims, they want to be heard. They want to feel like their lives matter. And they want their cases to be taken seriously. Just investigate them. That's the first and foremost thing that we've got to get right and consistently do it. Not one organization said that SVD handles cases of sexual assault or rape well most of the time. We got to get to what most of the time, mediocrity and everything, but this really affects people's lives. It affects our tourist base. I've seen it over and over, working with the district attorneys and with the NYPD. Predators, they target people they know are going to be back on a plane and out of here. And that's really, really just so heartbreaking to think about it. So I just wanted to tell you about that and have you think about that, and hope that this can be something that you could really, commit to as mayor and all that you do, because it's really important. There's a lot to do, a lot that we can do to do better by women and kids.
So true. And this is not professional. It's not political. It's personal. I grew up in a household where domestic violence was the norm until my brother and I became old enough to just stop it. And one should not have to wait until he or she becomes a young adult when they can just step in and say, we're not going to have a household of violence. And when I think about those encounters and how traumatic it was for me as a child, I have committed my life to making sure that people who are the victim of domestic violence should not have to live through that. And I did it as a police officer, as an advocate, a state senator, and now the borough president. We should make sure that those who are victims are treated with dignity, that their complaints are heard, investigated, and the guilty parties are brought to justice. And sometimes we are reluctant to do that. We are dismissive of domestic violence, and that leads to a greater level of violence where individuals are actually losing their lives. That is not going to happen in my city, and that's not how my police department, special victims unit, and sex crimes unit, how they're going to handle these cases.
Thank you so much. I know you got to go. There's just so many good questions in our chat. Can't ask you all of them, but there are questions about transit and safety and disability. um, about homelessness. And we're going to send them to you so that you can
Please.
see what are on now New York City members' minds. But just one last one that I think is important to touch on. We've talked about so many important issues, but the economy and small business. I don't know about you, but every single day there's another storefront that gets closed in my neighborhood. And there are now, I can go down a block and there may not be anybody open. How do you plan to support new entrepreneurs and small businesses um, to rebuild our city?
Well said, well said. And I'm going to stay on this point as much as possible. The recovery must be fast and strong, and I'm going to, really grow this economy to benefit all New Yorkers, no matter of gender, race, or economic background. That's something that we have failed to do in the past, and this won't happen if we don't get public safety under control. Tourism won't return. No one is going to open a company in the city that is unsafe. And I know we can do that. We have been wasting taxpayers' dollars. I am going to spend taxpayers' dollars with the same level of respect that my mom did growing up poor. And so when you look at this borough, as borough president, I oversaw one of the greatest economic expansion of any borough by creating the right atmosphere for growth in the city. And so it's about a people's plan, cash assistance to those who are in need, universal child care. That impacts women more than anything when it comes down to business, making sure we have a real housing voucher that pays the rent for real, and then attract new industries, everything from life sciences, startups, biotech, self-driving cars. We must become an attractive place to do business in the city. And that is what I'm going to do as the mayor. We're too expensive, too bureaucratic, too difficult to do business in the city. And that is impacting all of us every day.
Thank you so much for spending time with us today. We look forward to tonight. There's a debate. It's on New York
Yes,
One, right? What time is
yes,
it?
it is. 7 p.m.
All right, stay tuned, everybody. You can watch that tonight. Please check out more information about Mr. Adams and his plans, detailed plans he's got in our questionnaire, and his website's on there. Thank you so much. We look forward
Thank
to seeing
you.
you
Good
again.
seeing you again. Take care.
Take care.